The British property market just experienced the biggest shock in decades. And I'm not talking about interest rates, I'm not talking about house prices crashing. I'm talking about something far more fundamental, something that's been quietly hidden from landlords, tenants, and property investors across the UK. 3 days ago, buried deep inside more than 200 pages of government documentation, Labour revealed what they're calling rental reform. But when I went through every single page, line by line, what I found wasn't reform at all. It was a blueprint that fundamentally changes who owns property in Britain, who controls housing, and who ultimately benefits from the destruction of the private landlord model. This isn't about fixing bad landlords, this isn't about fairness, and it certainly isn't about helping tenants in the long run. This is about restructuring the UK housing market from the ground up, and by the end of this investigation, you'll understand why 23% of landlords are already planning to sell before these laws even take effect. You'll see why small landlords are being pushed out deliberately, not accidentally, and you'll understand why this could be the final chapter for private property investment as we've known it for generations. Before we go any further, if you want clear, data-driven analysis of where the UK property market is really heading without media spin or political messaging, take 2 seconds to like this video and subscribe to UK Property Report. This channel exists for one reason, to help you understand the forces shaping UK property before they hit your wallet. Because what I'm about to show you isn't being discussed on the BBC, it's not in the headlines, and most MPs don't even realise the implications of what they voted for. Let me be very clear about this. What happened 3 days ago was not a routine policy announcement. It was a declaration of war on small-scale private property ownership in Britain. And if you own property, rent property, or ever plan to buy property in the UK, this will change everything you think you know about the future.
Let's start with something that should immediately raise alarm bells. The document outlining these reforms was not written by politicians. The language, the structure, the modelling assumptions, none of it matches how UK housing legislation is normally drafted. Instead, it reads like a consultancy framework, and that's exactly what it is. Large sections of the policy architecture mirror frameworks used by global real estate advisory firms, the same firms that advise institutional investors, pension funds, and sovereign wealth funds on how to enter residential markets at scale. Firms that advise BlackRock, Vanguard, Legal & General Capital, Brookfield, and other multi-trillion-pound asset managers. This isn't speculation. The policy logic, the sequencing, even the terminology matches consultancy reports that already exist. Reports that openly argue that fragmented landlord ownership is inefficient and should be replaced with centralized institutional management. Once you understand that, everything else suddenly makes sense. Right now, the media narrative is simple. End no-fault evictions, protect tenants, improve standards. Sounds reasonable. But that's not what this is really about. The abolition of Section 21 is not the core reform, it's the lever. The real objective sits behind it. Because once no-fault evictions are removed, the government gains justification for something far more powerful: total system control. Hidden within the bill is the mandatory creation of a national landlord and property registration database. On the surface, it sounds administrative, harmless, just paperwork. But when you examine the technical scope, this database is unlike anything Britain has ever implemented in housing. For the first time, every rental property must be registered before it can legally be let. Every landlord, every tenancy agreement, every compliance action. And crucially, the system is designed for integration. Integration with mortgage data, planning applications, council tax records, energy performance databases, tribunal rulings, and eventually inheritance and capital gains records. For the first time in UK history, the state will have a real-time financial and behavioural map of property ownership. That is not tenant protection, that is wealth mapping, and wealth mapping always comes before wealth targeting.
Ask yourself this one question. If this was really about helping renters, why does the system need to know who owns multiple properties, how leveraged they are, their profit margins, their inheritance structures, and their transaction history? Why does a rental reform bill need to integrate with mortgage performance data? It doesn't, unless the goal is not reform, but restructuring ownership itself. This is not the first country to try this, and that's where the real warning signs appear. This model has already been deployed across Europe, Germany, the Netherlands, parts of Scandinavia. The pattern is always the same. Introduce complex compliance rules under the banner of fairness, increase administrative burden on small landlords, create legal uncertainty and income risk, watch small landlords exit en masse. Institutional capital steps in and buys distressed stock. Germany is the clearest example. After rent caps and eviction restrictions were introduced, individual landlords exited the market at scale. Within 5 years, institutional ownership in major German cities exploded. And what happened next? Rents didn't fall, they surged. Berlin rents increased by over 60% in 5 years, Munich by more than 50%. Why? Because when ownership concentrates, competition disappears. Large landlords don't compete the way individuals do. They optimize, they algorithmically price, they move in lockstep. And Britain is now following the same path. Here's something most people don't understand. Big investors love regulation, not despite it, because of it. Complex rules don't hurt them, they destroy their competition. An individual landlord with 1 or 2 properties can't afford compliance teams, can't absorb long void periods, can't fight tribunal delays, and can't risk non-paying tenants for months. An institution with 10,000 units can. So when regulation increases, small landlords don't adapt, they leave. And the evidence is already there. Surveys from landlords associations show 1 in 4 landlords plans to sell within the next 2 years. That's hundreds of thousands of properties potentially exiting the private rental sector. And those homes don't disappear, they change hands. Now, let's talk about the mathematics they don't publish. The government talks about security, fairness and stability, but they avoid one thing: supply maths. If even 20% of landlords exit, that's roughly 450,000 rental homes removed or consolidated. Demand doesn't fall. Population growth hasn't stopped. Net migration remains high. House building is still below target.
So what happens when supply falls and demand stays constant? Rents rise, not slowly, violently. Historical UK data shows that even a 10% reduction in rental supply leads to rent inflation well above wage growth. Double that and the impact becomes socially explosive. And who survives that environment? Not tenants, not small landlords, only capital. The sequencing of these reforms is critical. Section 21 is removed first, but the promised systems, tribunals, databases, enforcement capacity come later. That creates a legal vacuum. Landlords lose protections before replacements are functional. Risk spikes overnight, and when risk spikes, capital demands higher returns or exits. Small landlords exit, big players wait, then buy. This is not poor planning, it's managed disruption, a textbook consolidation strategy. Now let's talk about what happens next, because once you understand who benefits from this system, the direction of travel becomes impossible to ignore. While small landlords are being squeezed by compliance risk, legal uncertainty and rising costs, institutional capital is preparing, not reacting, preparing. Over the past 18 months, UK pension funds, insurance-backed property vehicles, and international real estate investment firms have been increasing their exposure to residential property through bulk acquisitions, entire portfolios, whole developments, distressed stock. They're not worried about rental reform, they're counting on it. Because the moment regulation drives out fragmented ownership, prices soften briefly and scale buyers step in with cash. This is how consolidation always works. A landlord with one or two properties operates on tight margins: mortgage, maintenance, letting fees, tax. Add tribunal delays, no guaranteed possession timelines, mandatory registration systems, increased inspection exposure and data reporting requirements. Suddenly, risk outweighs reward, not because the property is unviable, but because uncertainty kills cash flow-based investing. When income becomes unpredictable, leveraged owners have no choice. They exit. And when many exit at once, prices don't crash, they reprice under pressure. That's where institutions enter. They don't need yields in the same way individuals do. They accept lower yields in exchange for long-term appreciation, policy protection, regulatory influence, and market dominance.
This isn't theory. It's the same playbook used in German housing, US single-family rental consolidation, student accommodation and care homes, and now British private renting. Here's where this stops being just about landlords, because once ownership consolidates, something else changes: choice. In a fragmented market, tenants choose landlords. In a consolidated market, systems choose tenants. Algorithms decide pricing. Algorithms decide eligibility. Algorithms decide renewal terms. And the infrastructure being built now, registration databases, compliance scoring, integrated records, is exactly what you need to make that shift possible. Once rental access is mediated through central systems, property stops being something you own, it becomes something you're allocated. And allocation systems always come with criteria. The landlord database is not static. It's designed to evolve. Data isn't just collected, it's analysed. Payment history, dispute frequency, maintenance response times, tenant turnover, energy efficiency trajectories. On the tenant side, rent payment behaviour, employment stability, household composition changes, complaint patterns. This isn't about fairness, it's about predictive management. Who is stable? Who is costly? Who creates friction? And when data is used this way, behaviour changes not through law, but through pressure. Access becomes conditional. This is where the narrative flips, because tenants are being told these reforms protect them. But in consolidated markets, protection often turns into gatekeeping. Large landlords don't want risk. They want predictable incomes, stable households, and low interaction costs. Tenants who fall outside algorithmic norms, the self-employed for instance, those with irregular income, credit blips or non-standard households, become harder to place, not because it's illegal to rent to them, but because systems quietly deprioritize them. No explanation, no appeal, just no availability. And when alternatives disappear, power shifts. People assume once big landlords dominate, rents stabilize. They don't. They synchronize. Algorithms don't compete emotionally. They optimize collectively. Rents rise faster, more consistently, with less volatility. Which sounds good until you realize volatility was the only thing that allowed tenants to find deals. Now let's talk about the exit, because many landlords assume they can just sell. That assumption may not hold. Buried within the legislation are provisions allowing the government to activate market stability measures. If too many landlords attempt to exit simultaneously, the government can delay completions, impose cooling-off periods, restrict eligible buyers, and prioritise approved purchasers. These powers already exist in emergency frameworks. They were justified during COVID, now they're being normalised. Because mass exits disrupt the transfer process. Institutions need orderly supply, not chaos. And when markets are stabilized, access is never equal. Approved buyers are typically registered institutional entities and capital-backed organizations, not individuals, not families trying to buy former rentals. In the short term, tenants may feel safer. In the long term, they face fewer landlords, fewer choices, higher rents, more bureaucracy, and less negotiation. And once housing access is mediated through systems, appealing decisions becomes nearly impossible. You don't argue with an algorithm, you comply or you're excluded.
This system only works if people don't see the full picture. That's why the messaging focuses on rogue landlords, fairness, security, and modernization, not ownership concentration, data control, and consolidation. This is not about left or right. It's not about tenants versus landlords. It's about who controls housing in Britain for the next 50 years. Individual ownership decentralizes power. Consolidation concentrates it. And once concentrated, it rarely returns. This trajectory is not inevitable, but it is time-sensitive. Systems are hardest to stop before they're fully operational. Once embedded, resistance becomes exponentially harder. Legal challenges matter, public scrutiny matters, political pressure matters, but most of all, understanding matters. Because systems built on compliance fail when compliance evaporates. This is why information is the real battleground. Once people understand why landlords are exiting, who is buying, how data is being used, and where control is shifting, the narrative breaks. And when narratives break, policies change. If you own property, rent property, or care about the future of housing in the UK, share this video with someone who needs to understand what's really happening. Subscribe to UK Property Report for ongoing data-driven analysis of UK housing policy, market movements, and the forces shaping property ownership behind the scenes. This channel exists to expose what's hidden beneath the headlines before it's too late to act. Because once these systems are fully live, this conversation won't be possible anymore. This isn't just rental reform, it's the systematic dismantling of individual property ownership in favour of corporate control and bureaucratic management. The winners will be institutional investors, technology firms, and central authorities. The losers will be landlords who lose their assets, tenants who lose choice, and citizens who lose privacy and autonomy. Now you know the truth. The question is what you're going to do about it. Because if nothing changes, this video will be remembered as one of the last warnings before individual property ownership in the United Kingdom quietly disappeared forever.